And I just felt such excruciating pain. I remember that I wanted to be that. I wanted to be normal.
How are you feeling, by the way? Because I did one of these, my friend interviewed me, and I was so nervous before, and now I'm like, oh my God, I need to have more compassion for my guests in case they're really nervous.
I don't get nervous about these things because I enjoy conversation a lot. I really appreciate the art of conversation, and I love getting to know people through the course of a conversation. So I'm thrilled to be here.
And you're like happy to talk about yourself. You feel confident about that.
Yes, yes. It's taken me a
Cool.
while though. It's taken me a while to get here. I would have to say that. But I think doing this over the years has kind of built up like a muscle. It's like exercising muscle, so I feel comfortable with.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm actually excited to ask you about in terms of all the different things you've done. And I found your TikTok and was watching those and like entering new spaces. No, they're amazing. Oh my God, the one where you're talking about, I think you're about to perform in Carnegie Hall and you're like preparing so much because it's thousands of people. It's such a big thing. And your mentor tells you like you don't need to stress because you just need to show up. You're like, obviously I'm going to
Yep.
show up. Like all these people are coming. He's like, no, show up for you. And I sent that to my brother who's going through exam period at the moment for his master's and super stressed and about like performing and perfectionism. And I'm like, no, like listen to this amazing woman who I'm about to interview. You just have to show up. It's like,
Yeah. It's about trusting the process, right? Like you do the work beforehand and that's it. The work, the beauty of it is in the process itself. And so by the time the day of the exam comes or the day of the performance comes, you just show up. That's it. There's nothing more than that. And you just show up and you trust yourself.
amazing. Okay, so I don't usually do this. There's only one other guest who has had this background where so much is going on that I'm like, okay, I just need to go through and repeat. Like I repeated to him what I knew about him, and I want to do that to you. And you can correct me afterwards if I've missed anything. And I know this isn't like a list of achievements or anything because I also heard that you were that's part of your story of having all these achievements but that being your whole identity. And it's like, but who are you on the inside? And being wary of not just like talking about what people have done versus who they are. So anyway, but I think for context, it's super helpful because it's just like a super interesting story. So, from what I understand, you were born in Japan, but moved like very young age to Hawaii. You started playing piano at 9 months. You were on TV at 3 years old. And this is because I was going to ask you, like, oh, child prodigy, like, how do you define that? Then I'm like, okay, this kind of makes sense. Like, you were on TV at 3 years old, reading a Mark Twain novel, solving algebraic equations. It's like, okay, yeah, it's beyond the level of what most 3-year-olds are doing. So, and then you become a concert pianist at a young age, touring around, accepted to university, I think at 14, but you didn't go at that point. So you went later to the Juilliard School and Columbia. And then in the midst of this, because I read an essay you wrote, I understand there's like kind of this other layer of things going on in the home with domestic violence, and also then you attract an abusive relationship at some point at university, which maybe we'll go into how all this fits in, which I think again is so important when it's like you're talking about the list of achievements, but it's like so much more to a person than just all these things. Anyway, but then you leave music around 30 and you write 8 novels, fiction novels, under a pen name, which is so amazing hearing you say, like, because your name was so associated with you as this performer, and then the freedom to write and express and explore under a totally different name, which is so cool. And then also on the side, you're like learning coding and you start building websites, and then you get into marketing, and somehow you end up as like director of marketing for a hotel in Hawaii, and then you make this TikTok and grow the audience to like 80,000 followers and talking about leadership, and then now you're like in a CMO role in New York, but part-time, and then you're doing other things, and then you're on Twitter, and that's how we met, and now you're here. But okay, there's obviously so much more in there.
Bravo, bravo. Even I have a hard time describing what it is that I do. So that was a wonderful, very accurate, I think, summary.
Cool. Did I miss anything? Oh, and your uncle, it was like a famous mathematician.
Yes. And the TikTok stint was, I was doing a leadership consulting at the time. So I built my business via TikTok, via that platform. So that was my sort of chapter there while I was doing that.
Which is so cool. And I also love all this. For me, it's so helpful because it's like all these things that seem quite different. It's like you letting yourself explore and be like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 5 years or what I'm even going to be interested in. So I can like throw myself into this and then it can evolve, which I think that's something that keeps so many of us stuck. Like, what's my path going to be in 10 years from now? And then you kind of
yeah.
don't even start.
Yeah, because we're a culture and a society that gets very locked into the idea of results and outcomes. And so if we're bound by that kind of thinking, then it becomes very difficult to start something new because you're already overthinking about, well, what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't go the way that I want? What if and what if? And I've been very fortunate, and I always preface every time I talk about the things that I've done, I always preface it by saying that I was very fortunate and very privileged to have been able to explore my curiosities in the ways that I have. I always try to lead with my curiosity, and if there's something I'm passionate about, to see where it takes me to explore it without any preconceived notions, without any expectation of results, without saying it has to be this way, but to just see where it leads me. And that has really been the path with which I've walked my life.
Amazing. But I mean, if we go back to the very beginning and talk about how you grew up, which is usually the first question, and maybe I can just ask you so you can explain to us what that was like. But I mean, I imagine that wasn't your choice as a 9-month-old to start playing piano.
Well, it was actually, I always loved music. My parents never forced me. They never pushed me. It was not this type of situation. It was because I loved it. And my mother even has stories of how before I was even born, when I was still inside of her, she's actually an amateur pianist and a big classical music lover. And every time she would listen to music, I would move inside of her and I would just react so strongly to music. And so after I was born, the piano became my favorite toy in the house. The piano and books were my two favorite toys in the house. Obsessed. I was obsessed with them. I was obsessed with the sound of the piano. And because I responded so strongly to music and so strongly to the sounds of the piano, my mother just sat me at the piano bench when I was 9 months old as soon as I could sit up. And I became obsessed. And I have perfect pitch as well. So I would, just have so much fun at the piano, like identifying these sounds. And she was my first teacher. It was really just maybe 2 minutes at the piano every day. It was just one of those playtime kind of things. But the piano was really where the piano and books were both places where I really, I think, found my voice and found a way to express myself and to bring to life the complexities of what I felt within me. I think that's the best way to put it. And it was obviously my development and the way in which I perceived the world was very different from certainly the people around me and from children my age. And so the only place where I could feel that type of ability to really express myself to my fullest capacity was through art, whether that was through writing, through being pulled into books and my imagination taking flight and taking me somewhere else, whether it was through the piano, and also within pattern recognition within mathematics was always fascinating to me, and being able to put together these different kind of complex things together.
So what are some of your earliest memories? Because I'm thinking even you being on TV at 3 years old, like, do you even isn't that free memory?
Yeah, very, very faint memories. But I do have to say, there are certain moments, and when I was, so this was before my brother was born, so I must have been 2.5 years old. One of my very earliest memories was, this may sound very strange. I don't think I've ever spoken about this publicly, to be honest, but I remember watching, there was a documentary on television that my mother was watching. I think it was an Australian documentary because it took place in Australia. It was about kangaroos. And I don't remember the whole context of the documentary, but I remember the ending. And there was some reason why this human who had befriended like a wild kangaroo, and this kangaroo had had a baby, and but for some reason, the human, the person had to take the baby away from the mother for some, and to take it to a sanctuary, to take it somewhere. There was some reason for that. And I just remember the end of that documentary where this kangaroo mother trusts this person with her child, this baby, and this person takes the baby to the truck, and to leave. And the kangaroo just watches, doesn't try to fight him, doesn't try to do any of that, and just watches him leave with her child. And I cried for probably 2 or 3 days after watching that because I felt such empathy for this mother and for the complexity of that situation, to trust this human being, this total different species with her baby. And my mother actually wrote a book in Japanese that was released in Japan about what it meant to raise me, to raise a child who was so different. And she brings this incident up in her book. And she said, despite all the other advancements in terms of education, what I did at the piano, despite all of that, it was that moment when I cried at the end of this documentary that she genuinely realized how different I was. And she said the reason for that was, how does a 2.5-year-old comprehend and understand a mother's grief? She said that's when I knew Grace was different, that the way she saw the world and perceived the world was not like others. And so when we talk about, prodigies, and we talk about, yes, certainly we have pattern recognition and we have certain abilities, I think, in which we visually understand things that are not like perhaps normal childhood development. I think what often gets overlooked in that is that we are usually highly sensitive beings as well. We feel things in a different way. If you look at other musical prodigies, Yevgeny Kissin comes to mind. There's a wonderful historical recording of him performing the Chopin piano concerto at age 12, I believe, in Moscow. What's astounding is not just the technical mastery. What's truly astounding is that this little boy is communicating and expressing such profound emotion of grief, of love, of heartache. How can a child who has not experienced that yet in their life understand that and then communicate that, right? That's the part that's hard to understand and hard to define. And I think that was really, when you talk about my childhood and how it was different, for me, what I remember is that I felt the world differently. I perceived the world differently than other children my age. So that was my earliest memory at 2.5. And so there are these glimpses that I remember, but it's more about how I perceived those moments rather than the actuality of the details.
Huh. And so how do you make sense of that?
It was very difficult. I mean, there's no way around it. It was very, very hard for me. Um, it's a lesson that I think has been the journey of my life. It is one that I'm still continuing to unravel and understand better. As a child, I felt enormously alienated and lonely on many, many, many levels. I was a first generation immigrant. My parents did not speak English. I was really, as the oldest child, was kind of the face of the family to be able to kind of handle things in a foreign country. I did not have relatives around us, right? All of my cousins and aunts and uncles were in Japan, so there was no support system. I was obviously very different from other children. So it was the things that excited me, the things that I loved were not things that were necessarily relatable. I was a young Asian girl in a very white male dominated industry of classical music. I was very, very lonely. And I think that loneliness was ironically what fueled my abilities and my talents in the arts, because I had no other avenue to express myself except through music and through writing. And that was the only way that I found my voice. So it took me a very, very long time. And you had mentioned at the start of this conversation about, the different things that I had done. And one thing that ties all of them together, however different those paths may be, is the thread of human connection. Right? And for me, I think this has been the theme. This is the theme of my life. This is the journey of my life, to understand what genuine, authentic human connection means. I have explored that in many different ways, by being a musician, by being a writer, by being a teacher, by being a leader, by being a marketer, a communicator. All of these things are different facets of that larger theme. And it's because I did not have it that the journey of my life was to discover it and understand it. And to the point that now my business that I run, Kizuna, is the Japanese word that means the deep bond of connection. I named my business after it, to remind myself, to understand that this is it, and this is what I do. This is the core of who I am, because that was what I was meant to find in this lifetime.
Amazing. Because that's what I was going to ask you, like how making sense of a child prodigy, is it just, my immediate thought was like, oh, is it just really high IQ? But it's obviously not that, because you could have the really high IQ without the level of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think that that's such a good point. I think there is that delineation of feeling and perceiving the world differently, I think, than what would be the normal sort of development emotionally for a child. I was also, of course, circumstantially, I was thrust into an adult situation at a very early age. I was surrounded by adults more than children, oftentimes, because of what I did, and because I was professionally performing at an early age. I had to understand what it means to work professionally, what it means to show up, what it means to be consistent, what it means to network and connect and hustle and grind and all that stuff that we learn later in life. I had to learn it at a very, very early age, about discipline and determination and all of that.
Huh. And it was you who wanted to do these things?
Yes, I did. My father was very disconnected from what I did. If anything, he, on a personal level, I think he was very, I think he was in many ways afraid of me, to be in a foreign country so far from your own family, and then to have a child who was so different at, that you almost couldn't comprehend, or couldn't understand how to deal with that child. Um, and so in many ways, my father, I believe, was, if anything, resentful of my music. Um, my mother loved music, as I said, but she was always like, oh, you do it if you want to do it, and I'll be there, like cheering you on, and I'm proud of you, um, but I've always, even with music, what was so interesting is that I didn't plan on continuing music after I finished high school. I actually wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to help people. I wanted to heal people. That was always kind of my motivation. But at 17 years old, my last year in high school, I had, of course, applied already to colleges and universities. And that spring, I made my Carnegie Hall debut. And I fell madly in love with New York City, with the artistic feeling there. I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be an artist in that city. And so when I came back from that performance, my acceptance letters came in from all the colleges, and I ended up choosing Columbia because of their program with Juilliard, so I could be in New York City. And so initially, the plan wasn't even for me to continue playing the piano after I graduated. I wanted to explore other things, but I got pulled back into it and did it for another 10 years.
Huh. And so why did your parents move to Hawaii from Japan to begin with?
because they had their honeymoon in Hawaii after they got married, and they fell in love with Hawaii. And so my father at the time was working for a large corporation for Honda, and he asked to be transferred to the Hawaii office so that they could move there. So it was really they just fell in love with the islands. They loved the culture there. But I was born in Japan first, so my father went to Hawaii ahead of time to get things ready and to start working there. And then after I was born in Japan, my mother and I went to Hawaii. I was just 3 months old when we moved to Hawaii.
And what were the values they instilled in you? Like, what was it they wanted for you?
I had a difficult childhood within my family life. My father was abusive, physically, emotionally. He was, I don't really have strong memories of him other than the terror of him because he was not very present in our household and would be gone for, weeks at a time before coming back, etc. My mother was really my primary caregiver, the authority figure in my life, influential figure in my life. My mother is a brilliant educator. That is her background. Her degrees in education. That's what she did throughout her whole life. She loved to teach. And so for me, my relationship with my mother was more one in which she she didn't put any limits on me intellectually. I think that would be the best way to kind of characterize that. She believed I could do anything I wanted. Literally, she never. I don't have a single memory of her saying to me, "No, you can't do that," or "You shouldn't do that." If I just randomly decided now, "Hey, I want to dance ballet," she'd be like, "All right, go ahead." I mean, she's always been this kind of person, and so in that sense, there was a tremendous freedom in what I could explore from an early age, and she encouraged that. She took me to the library. There were things that she did. Just, I think, as an educator, she understood how to provide certain kinds of environments to me, especially because our home life was so chaotic and so unstable. I think she was very, very conscious of the other ways in which she could provide opportunity and spaces for me to grow. Things like she took me to the neighborhood library every single day. So apparently since when I was in diapers. And by the way, she took notes and a journal that I still have somewhere in my apartment every single day of my progress and how I grew and how I changed for like 3 years. Like, can you imagine how many days that is? But she took a journal of my sleeping habits, of what I did, what I wanted, what I was interested in reading, my curiosity, and she took notes of that so she could really understand where my mind was going or where it was headed. And so she took me to the library every single day while I was still in diapers, and I would literally be sitting on the floor reading. And of course, everybody was freaking out because I was still in diapers and I was reading. But I would be sitting there and reading, and she would just sit there. And they had a little Japanese literature section, so she would just sit there. And she was also a very avid reader, so she would sit there quietly reading and just let me crawl on the floor and let me take whatever book I wanted off the shelf and read. So it was that kind of limitlessness that I think I absorbed at a very early age. She wasn't like, "Oh, Grace, don't do that. Be careful, dangerous." She was never like that. Um, and I think that has very much, when I look back on it, I think it's very much influenced who I've eventually become.
Huh. And was she teaching you, or your brain was just somehow able to
I don't
make
remember.
sense of it?
I honestly don't remember because what I remember is my mother reading Japanese children books to me. That I do remember because I remember her voice and reading it to me. But she could not read English books. So I honestly don't know how I learned. I do remember her buying me, every time she bought me a book, it was all English language books, like vocabulary books and this. And I must have just started picking it up by myself because by the time I was 3, like I said, I was reading extraordinarily advanced books. She had no idea. I remember being I read my first Stephen King book when I was 7 years old. And she had no idea what the content of that book was. And I don't even know where I picked up the name Stephen King. I must have heard adults talking about it or something. I must have picked it up somewhere. Maybe I saw it in the newspaper or something about it being a best-selling book. And I remember I bought The Shining, which had, at the time, the cover was this faceless boy, the silver cover of The Shining. And my mother took it to the cashier to buy it. And I remember she and I having this conversation, and I said in English, I can't wait to read it. And I remember the person ringing us up just flipped out because I was a 7-year-old kid, and he couldn't believe that it was for me. And my mother couldn't understand why he was having that reaction because she didn't understand that it was a horror novel and it was like all this kind of graphic stuff in it. But she just wanted me to read whatever it was that I wanted to read. She was this kind of mother. So she would just, bookstores were like, like a kid in a candy store. That was my haven, bookstore. And I would just buy all of these books and just read in every single genre possible.
And how did you deal with those like adult concepts? I mean, that's still like a book. I would never read that type of genre now because I'm like, this is too
You
disturbing.
know, I think there's something wonderful about books that I love both as a reader and as a writer, is what we get from it and what we see in it reflects who we are at a given moment in time. What I saw in it was what a 7-year-old would see in it. Red rum, these things that were in The Shining, I didn't really grasp it. I read it, but there's no way that I could grasp it to the extent that I would going back and reading it now. I think what was more interesting to me what has always been interesting to me, I think, about these stories and these books, were the characters in it, right? These people. I was fascinated by the stories of other people, by the the fears and the challenges that they battled, this kind of torment, the loneliness, the rage, the anger. I don't know. Somehow reading about it perhaps made me feel less alone, less alone with all of the stuff that I didn't know how to manage or handle.
And were you aware of the pain your mother was experiencing?
Yes and no, if I'm being honest. Yes, I was my mother's protector. That was my role. I protected her from my father. I protected her from the world. In retrospect, I don't know if that was the right thing to do. Of course, it should not, none of it should have happened. Of course, we would never wish that on anyone. But I became almost like a parent to her in that sense. And sometimes I think maybe me doing that kept her in a state of victimhood longer than if she had had to learn to step up for herself. Um, but I did not want her to hurt. I felt an enormous, I think, responsibility as the oldest child, certainly to protect her, but also because I spoke the language. I understood the country better than she did. Um, I understood that and did that for many years. And then there was a period of time after I left music, as I became an author, as I got into, different fields, there was a period of time where I became very angry and resentful of her. And I think it was because I was finally starting to process really everything that I had gone through in my life and kind of moving through that. And so we were estranged for a period of time, um, while I worked through all of that. And during that time, all I could see was her. All I could see was her as how do I say this? An instigator, not an instigator, but like complicit, an accomplice in all of the stuff that had happened to me. And I could no longer see her pain. I could no longer see the complexities of who she was. All I had was just rage at her for not having my back, for not protecting me, for not being a mother to me in the ways that I needed. Um, and then I moved through it. And now I'm at a place where I have tremendous compassion for what she went through. And I understand. And I guess I forgive her in many ways because she did what she could. And This is life. Sorry, I'm getting very emotional. This is life. We don't. It's it's not a straight line, and we all. She went through a lot,
Mm.
and I understand her pain. Perhaps because now finally I've walked and lived long enough to understand what it means to be on the receiving end of that kind of pain. And so I have greater empathy for her, and I understand how lonely she must have been, and how difficult it must have been for her. So we're on good terms now, but as I said, it was a process. Um, we only know what we know at a given moment in time, and we can only act and choose based on what we know at a given moment in time. So of course, it changes as we get older, as we experience different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people only doing like the best that they can, even, if they're even behaving in an extreme way, presumably like they're in survival mode or they're in so much pain, even someone abusing someone, it's like whatever's happened to them in their life that they don't know how to cope in any other way. And so did your parents stay together?
No. I haven't seen my father since I was 17. And they split up right around, I think I was around 13 years old when they split up. And then I only saw him very sporadically after that. And then not since I was 17.
And so is what was kind of the rage, like you wish your mum had like saved you from that and had the strength to leave him earlier and not put up with the abuse?
Part of it was that. Part of it is it's a very complicated dynamic. My mother, I think she felt fundamentally like a failure, that she had failed in her marriage, she had failed as a mother. And because of that, I think she clung to me. As I said, I was her protector. I was she clung to me because I was proof. Her genius daughter was proof that her life was not a failure. And that's a very hard thing on my end to live with, when your mother's entire life is vicariously lived through your own. And I think that was the part that I resented more than anything, because so many of the limitations or limiting beliefs, conditioned narratives that I have had to move through, I realize were my mother's. It was her voice in my head. It was her voice telling me not to trust people. It was her voice telling me to isolate myself. It was her voice, because that's what she had to do to survive, right? That was her narrative. That was her paradigm. And when I understood that later in my life, I was so angry. I was so angry with her that I had to do all this energy and all this work to break through that if I wanted to have a life that was different from hers, right? To have a life of my own. And I think that was really where the rage came from. And later the acceptance, to understand that that was just, she was unable to break through that. But that's okay. That's okay. It doesn't mean that I can't have compassion for her or understand where it's coming from. But it took so much work to be able to move past that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, totally different, but I went through depression, and there was a period in there when I started, learning all this stuff. It's like what happened in childhood and like your needs not being met. And then I had that rage and like blame and like, you like fucked me up.
Yeah.
But I feel like, and then you can get to compassion and be like, oh, it's like no one's fault. Everyone was doing the best that they could. And I didn't experience, it was like nothing bad happened. It's just that whatever emotional needs weren't met for all variety of reasons. but it is hard, you know, when you're in pain and you're in suffering, you can't
Yes.
see that. And I guess it is a process. And yeah, people have to I think it's like a normal kind of thing to go through with your parents. And then you realize, like, cool. And then it just continues with the next generation. Like, we pass our stuff
Yeah.
on. But it's like you're doing such a service to the world and like future generations by having done the work. Because it can feel like, why do I have to do the work? And like the people before me didn't do it and they've like messed me up. But then it's like, okay, by like, you know, now you're here speaking and like other people just by coming into contact with people having gone through this transformation, it's like it has an impact on other people.
I agree. This is what generational evolution means, right? So that we can do better. It doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but we can try to do better for the next generation. And then hopefully they will do better than us and so on and so forth. And but it is hard. And I give credit to anyone listening who is going through it right now, who's doing that very, very difficult internal work, because there's nothing. I have done a lot of things in my life, and let me tell you, there is nothing in the world that is harder than facing yourself and to move through this. That is the hardest work on the planet. And it takes tremendous courage and it takes tremendous bravery to be able to do that. So I give so much credit to all of you who are doing that, so that you don't repeat the same patterns, so that we can be better moving forward. That's huge kudos to all of you doing that.
Mm. And so how did you see yourself as a child, maybe around like 10 or something? You're playing the piano all the time. So is it just like you were so into it, so then your mum's like, okay, we'll get you lessons, and then it's like, wow, you're so good, and you start performing, and it just kind of goes.
And then, I mean, you do have to be conscious of developing that career, right? And then you meet people in the industry. There are managers, there are agents, there are PR people who help manage the growth of that career, right? It's the same thing. There are important influential artists in the industry that you go and play for, that you network with, that you need their referral or you need their support. And it kind of organically started happening that way. I think it wasn't until I was maybe like 13 or 14 that I really became more like cognizant of it, like aware of it because when you're a child, like it was so natural to me. I didn't think what I was doing was different necessarily, because it was my play toy, right? Like I loved to play the piano. And I didn't experience nervousness or fear or any of that because I'm a child. When you're a child, you feel that. You're not conscious enough to be able to recognize it. And then it was really when I hit my teenage years, of course, puberty, you start changing, hormones start going, all these things start happening, and you become much more self-conscious, right? And you start to understand yourself, right? Like as a being, that I started to become more cognizant of what was happening. And that was a very difficult time in my life. That I would say 13 through 15 were enormously challenging period in my life. My parents finally got divorced. It was messy. It was horrible. I was really starting to I made my debut in Japan at the age of 13. There were a lot of international things that were starting to happen for me. And I felt more alone than ever. I felt like I was cut off from everyone. I felt like no one understood me. I felt disgusting, like I hated the way I looked. There was all of this kind of internal sort of turmoil. And then I had to go on stage, and I was at this weird age where like people were still trying to dress me as if I was like 10 years old, but then I'm not anymore. But then I'm not a woman either yet. So it's that weird period where like I was looking strange in my dresses too, because I didn't know what I was supposed to be wearing. And like, just a very bizarre sort of transitional period. And I was miserable, absolutely miserable. Once I hit, I think 15, 16, I started to have more like more of a sense of self, like this sense of getting older, knowing what I want, knowing what I don't want, saying that's for me or that's not for me. I was able to articulate those things a bit better. So it got a little bit better moving forward, but that was a tough period. Yeah.
And were you going to school normally, or
Mm-hmm.
it was?
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't like the touring schedule that I had later in life in which I would be gone for like, 6 weeks at a time or 8 weeks at a time. These were more performances that were kind of once every like 2, 3 months or something like that. So I would miss like a couple of days of school, come back, regular life, etc.
And you'd just be practicing piano all the time after school?
No, actually, surprisingly not. I was very active. So I don't know if I should be admitting this for anyone who's like practicing piano. It's very important for you to be practicing diligently every day and consistently. As a teacher, that's what I would say. However, for me, I was pretty bad with my practice habits as a child. I got much better in terms of consistency as I got older, of course, because of the demands of concertizing and everything. It demanded that. But at that age, I was involved with dance. I took dance classes. I went to a highly academic school, which was wonderful because it allowed me to take very challenging courses. So I was involved, with that and with a couple of clubs. So for me, I had piano lesson once a week, of course. I tended to cram my practicing the day or two before the lesson, and I would, practice maybe 4 hours, 5 hours on Thursday and Friday, and then my lesson was on Saturday. So I tended to do that, but most of the time I did other things. I had the opportunity to explore other things, so it was less of a. And I think part of that was because, and I do have to say this, part of it was because I think I had very good education, piano education. So my technique, my virtuosity was very strong. I always have had very effortless technique. I haven't had to practice hours on end necessarily. It came to me a bit easier. As I got older, as I said, as the schedule and the touring schedule, transformed and the requirements of what I needed to play changed, there's no shortcutting it. You have to put in the time. And that became a big deal for me. Yeah.
Huh. So at school, did you felt like you fit in and you were doing like extra courses, but it was just like, okay, you were like the really smart one in your year. It wasn't like you were so different.
It's so interesting because I'm remembering all these memories now as we're talking about it. I, in terms of, yes, in terms of the touring, in terms of, yes, I was always the smart one and et cetera, all of that. But I felt very, even though I tried to do these things in terms of, participating in clubs or doing this and that to normalize my life, emotionally, I never felt I belonged, ever, like deeply, profoundly. And like a lot of teenagers, I did a lot of things to make myself seem normal. So I would do things like pretend that I was dumber than I was. I would pretend I didn't know the answer to something. I would lie about what I got. Like, for example, if I got 100% or 98% on a test, I would lie about it. And I would say, oh, I freaking failed it. And like, I would say all these things to, to normalize myself because I knew I wasn't like the rest. And that was a very bad habit, by the way, that followed me for many, many, many years after that, in which I played small so that I could be more palatable and acceptable to others. And I think many of us fall into that. And I think it starts around those high school years when we start to kind of amputate parts of ourselves or kind of start to like conform to something in order to feel accepted by the group, which is definitely what happened to me in high school. So um, I I have not kept in touch with anyone from high school. Like I literally did not have a single. I had a social circle. I had like friends to hang out with, but they weren't friends. Like they weren't real friends by any means whatsoever. And I have not kept in touch or been in touch with a single one of them since I left.
And what about your relationship with your brother?
So my brother and I I've had a complex relationship as growing up in that kind of family dynamic. That's the natural result, I think. Um, my younger brother was also someone I deeply protected. It was my brother and my mother that got the worst of it from my father. And I was always extraordinarily protective of both of them because of that. And I think he has had a very long, painful journey of his own. I think that dynamic between father and son, especially, and what it means to be a man, and all of those complex qualities that are involved in that he's been going through. I am currently estranged from my brother. We've been estranged for a couple of years now because I realized a couple of years ago that I could not keep protecting him, that I could not keep, that as long as I kept doing that, I was enabling him and I was not allowing him to be able to stand on his own 2 feet. And I also realized that where he's at right now in his own journey, because we all have our own individual journeys, where he's at, he doesn't have the capacity yet to see me as I am and to understand me as I am. And I also need that. I deserve that from my sibling, from my brother. But he's not there yet. That's his journey has not taken him there yet. So I decided to leave, to end contact with him. I have hope. He is my younger brother, and he still has a long ways to go, a long life to live. I miss, more than anything, I miss my nephew. He has a son. I wish I could spend time with him, but my brother must walk his path now, and he has his own individual journey. And I have hope that in the future, once he's able to get to a certain place, I think he'll reach out to me and we'll reconnect. But right now, he has to do it alone. He has to do it without me.
Because I'm wondering if it was difficult for him, like, kind of growing up with you as a sister being
yes,
this, like,
I think that was a huge part of it. That was a huge part of it too, which is why I also realize it's better for me right now to step away so that he can find out who he is. He is individually, his path, his way forward. It was, I think, part of my overprotection of him. It's interesting, similar to how I played small or I would make myself acceptable to people, in a similar vein. I think I was overprotective of him because there was almost this sense of guilt. And it's something I've kind of battled with throughout my life, this guilt. Because I will say this to everyone listening, I am not special. I just randomly, because of chance and genetics, happen to be born a certain way. This is not something that I earned or something, that I just happened to have been born this way. And there's this peculiar sense of guilt that you kind of internalize because you're like, why was I like born this way and was lucky enough to be able to like do these things. But for example, my brother wasn't, right? Or someone else. And because of that, I have either played small or overcompensated in some weird way out of that sense of odd guilt. And so my journey has been about like being able to really stand in myself, like so many of us, right? Like really own who I am in totality without feeling bad about it or guilty about it and saying, yeah, this is who I am, it's just the way it turned out and this is who I am. So that I don't fall into, I think, these kinds of choices or actions that are ultimately not healthy for me, as an individual as well.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if you also looked at him, because it could be easy for someone to look at you like, oh my God, wow, like she's achieving all this stuff and blah, 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 and going internationally and whatever. Like, obviously, it's a huge deal. But then for you to be feeling so isolated and lonely and like looking at someone who's more normal and being like, oh, they get to fit in, they don't have to hide themselves,
Yes.
they're like the normal child.
Yes. I remember there were times, especially as I headed into my teenage years, and I was more conscious of, of what was happening and the differences. I remember like I would be nervous. That was right around the time when I started to get nervous for performances because I started to become more self-aware. And I would be looking outside the car window as we were driving to, for example, a concert hall, and I would see children playing outside or teenagers walking together, and laughing. And I just felt such excruciating pain. I remember that I wanted to be that. I wanted to be normal. Um, and why was it that I wasn't? And it took me a very long time. I was just on another podcast episode the other day, and I was talking about this. It took me a very long time, and perhaps it's a lesson that I'm still learning, if I'm being honest, that being different didn't make me broken or flawed or wrong somehow or faulty. That being different was part of what made me special. And it took me a very, very long time to understand that. So anyone who's listening, who may be feeling like, oh, this makes me weird or different or not like the rest, it's what makes you special. It's what makes you special. And that is such a hard lesson to learn because we want part of our sense of identity and our sense of self is formed from our relationships and our understanding of ourselves within a larger group, within a collective whole. This is a natural part of being a human being. We understand our sense of self, not only within ourselves, but also in terms of the people around us and how they perceive us, how we understand our relationships with one another. And the desire to feel accepted is a very human emotion. It's a very normal one. It's part of being human. So that can sometimes overtake us, especially if we don't have enough balance around us. I didn't have enough emotional support around me who understood that and could help me kind of move through that. But being different is what makes you you. It's what makes you uniquely special. And I really hope that anyone who's listening can understand that.
Mm. And I guess to know that it's normal because it's a survival instinct. Like if we don't fit in with the tribe, if we're cast out, then we literally will die. But like tens of thousands of years ago. Now it's like kind of impossible to not, like you will be able to find your tribe somewhere, like via the internet. It's like all these people I got to meet on Twitter. But
yes.
because I mean, I've also felt that stuff. Like I feel like it's so normal to be like, oh, I'm weird, like compared to whoever you grow up around. But it's like, yeah, it's great. Like now we get to connect with like nearly the entire like world of billions of people, so you will find similar people to you. But yeah, it is normal to fear being cast out because it's part of our biology. Okay, so did you love performing?
Yes, and I still do. I think I thrive in live environments. I thrive in these kind of situations where I'm interacting with people and I get to have conversations. I think because that was where I found connection. That was where I found connection, where I could express and be who I was on stage and connect with those who were listening. And I was always very connected with my audience. I still am. As I said, I felt things differently. I was very, very sensitive. And so I would feel when they're with me, or am I starting to lose them? How do I pull them back? How do I get them to come with me as I'm playing this? So I always felt very connected to that energy with others.
And you were kind of looked after within the system of managers and agents and whatever. It's like good decisions were made and it wasn't like people taking advantage of.
Oh, well, that's a whole other story. That's a whole other story. They made money off of my talent. That's what the industry is, in a nutshell. That's what they care about. Not necessarily about your well-being or what is good for your growth. They care about how can we leverage this talent and maximize every opportunity to get more money out of it. That is the business. That is what the business is. Um, art and commerce have very, very different objectives. And that was, I think, part of is one of the many, many reasons why I ended up leaving music. I felt like I didn't own my life. I felt like I didn't own my life. I felt it was owned by people in the industry. It was owned by the business. It was owned by the public, by the audience. But I wanted to own it. I wanted to know what it meant to own my life. I wanted to know who I was outside of this.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. Thinking of you on TikTok, it's like, that's so different. Like building the audience yourself, like you own it, everything. I mean, obviously the platform owns it and steals all your data. But aside from that, it's like, it's just so different from working with like all the different levels. I mean, and even in publishing, you would have experienced that. It's like, okay, it's your work, but then the publisher, and the copyright and blah, blah, blah. But there's like so many levels.
Yes.
And I think it's when you don't know the game you're in. Like if you know the game you're in and you're like, okay, whatever, making a film and I know this is how it works and this person takes this piece of the pie and blah, blah, blah. But obviously as a child, you can't know that.
Yeah.
And I assume your mother wouldn't have understood like how the whole system
right.
works.
And you're right. I think there are people that I know, artists that I know, who have made the game work for them, right? Which is fine. Like if you can live with that and be like, okay, I'm going to produce this really commercial album, and I know it's super commercial and it doesn't reflect who I am as an artist, but I'm going to do that because I'm going to use it as a stepping stone to get to this next place where I can then do whatever the hell I want. There are artists I know who are able to do that. I think I just was not one of those people. I just could not. I have never been able to operate, I think, in that kind of way. Even now, if something is not aligned with my values somehow, my core values and who I am, I just can't do it. Even if I know it's a tactic that if I was more objective about it and I just did it, that it would get me a certain kind of thing. I just have never been able to live my life that way. It's just not who I am.
Oh my God, I'm the same. And I struggle so much with this podcast stuff that it's like people are like, oh, why can't you do basic stuff? Like just telling people to subscribe and like doing these things that you just have to do. And I'm like, oh, it feels so uncomfortable. And some of it's just fear and you get over it. But it's like, I want the space to be able to like develop my own voice and figure it out and not just. Yeah.
Yeah. I resonate with that. It's true. I've had people, even as a leader, I have received sort of, opinions that were contrary to mine that said, Grace, you care too much. You got to be more objective and just look at it as the numbers, as this. And I said, no, but that's not, I don't think that's quality long-term vision. Quality long-term vision is when it's aligned with values and stuff. And it means you have to be more patient, of course. It means a lot of these things. But no, these kind of tactical sort of approaches has never been sort of the way I do things.
Mm. So when you were thinking about becoming a doctor, was that kind of like your bid to be like, oh, just have a normal life and just go and have a normal career?
It wasn't even a bid. It wasn't like I want to have a normal life. It wasn't that kind of thinking. It was more like I really genuinely enjoyed, like I said, I've always had passions, many passions, things that I loved. In high school, I loved physics, astrophysics in particular, and I loved biology. Just loved it with a passion. Like, I was terrible at chemistry. I didn't like chemistry, but biology and physics I adored. And I was reading like all these books, Stephen Hawking's, and like all this. I was just fascinated by the whole thing, and it was more that I wanted to explore, like, and I knew I was good with my hands, right? Obviously, as a pianist, so I thought, oh, maybe if I went into medicine, maybe surgeon, something where it requires precision with my hands, and I could really be helping people. I could really or maybe in research and help find the cure for cancer. And like I was very much taken by the ideals of it, the ideals of those concepts. And so it was never about like I want to have my life a certain way. It was more what it was that I wanted to explore. But then when I came to New York, I don't know how to explain that moment. It was like an epiphany to me, like just to be an artist in such a vibrant city with so much inspiration literally everywhere. That's what I wanted to throw myself into.
Cool. And and you weren't thinking like you would miss the piano if you did something else?
No, I know. Isn't that interesting? I didn't think that. And even now, I still play the piano, like it's not like I stopped. Uh, I gave a concert, last concert I gave, I think I want to say 2017 or 2018. I still perform, but now the difference is I only do it when I want to. And it's usually for like a cause or a charity or something that I want to support. And so I own the situation, right? I own the criteria when I choose to share my talents and the reasons behind it. So I think it was more that. And so when I was thinking about medicine, I wasn't thinking about like, oh, I'm never going to be able to play the piano again. I love the piano. I love music. I'm still going to play. But it's just not going to be like I don't know, like how I earn money or my career or my profession. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what did you end up studying at Columbia?
I actually studied European history at Columbia and minored in art history and also comparative literature. And then at Juilliard, of course, I continued piano performance.
Mm-hmm. And then, so I guess at this point in your life, you already felt free to follow your curiosity. Like you weren't trying to prove anything to someone or chase external validation.
Yes and no. Okay, so I always felt I was intellectually free, as I said, because of the way I was raised, intellectually free to explore my curiosities. So at Columbia, I felt no pressure, even though I wanted to pursue music as a profession, as a career. I wanted to explore what I was curious about, right? What interested me. I didn't feel any pressure that it had to be music or had to be this or that. Emotionally, it's a very different story, right? So intellectually, I was always very free with that, but emotionally, particularly as my musical career grew and it became more international. I started performing in Europe a lot more, and a lot of things started happening. There was, it wasn't that I was seeking emotional validation. It was more, I, I became, how do I say this? I sort of settled into the grace that everyone else perceived me as. So I fell back into the construct and the paradigm of others, right? So everybody saw me as pianist Grace. And so more and more as that career grew, I I was pianist Grace. Like I could also not see myself as anything other than pianist Grace. I remember there was this moment. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Cyrus. So I used to have an email address. This was way back in the day, like hotmail.com kind of days. And my email address was gracepiano@hotmail.com. And I didn't think anything of it until some random person who was not a musician said to me, wow, you're like really, piano is all you do. And it was just a careless kind of comment when he saw my email address or I gave him my email address. But I remember thinking, wow, is that like literally how I'm defining myself everywhere? Like just piano Grace, Grace piano, Grace piano. That's it, like everywhere. And that was essentially sort of the symbolic representation of what my life became after, I went off to New York and started really building my career there. I was defining myself by the way in which other people saw me. And they saw me as an international concert pianist and not as a living human being who has a wide variety of interests, who, is of course much more complex than just that. Which is why when I made the decision to leave music, it was so difficult because it was like I was giving up this identity, not only how I saw myself, but that everyone in my life saw me that way. And I was challenging that and saying, hey, I don't know who I am, but I'm going to go and find out. I'm going to figure this out because I know that it's more than this. And that's why it was such a momentous, like kind of huge decision in my life.
And people were uncomfortable with it?
Yes, and that was the interesting part. So for anyone who may be grappling with like fear or making a huge decision in your life, that decision to leave music was obviously to this day one of the biggest decisions I have ever made in my life and most difficult one because literally my whole life was defined by music, right? Piano. Um, and so the the worst part of it is the anticipation before you move through the fear. So when I was considering possibly leaving music, that state, that anxiety state was the worst part of all of it. And then once I made the decision, I said, okay, I'm going to start moving through this fear. I know I'm so scared. I don't know what the hell am I going to do. Who am I? What in the world is my life going to be like after this? But once I sort of accepted that and started moving through the fear, everybody else in my life had a much harder time dealing with it than I did, which was fascinating to me because it's not even their life. It's my life, but they struggled so hard to understand why I would be doing this, why I would give up a career that most people spend their entire lifetime trying to get, right? First of all, I had reached this point. They couldn't understand that I would challenge that I could walk away from that and say who I am is not defined by what it is that I do. And then so it just kind of shows you how easily people will put you into boxes and categorize you and view you in a certain way because it's simpler for them. It's easier for them, right? And when you challenge all of that, it causes them to question themselves too, right? It's a very hard thing. And you start looking at yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, whatever. So that was such a fascinating experience, that whole period of time in my life. Moving, the period before it was harder than actually moving through it, moving through the fear.
And was there like a trigger that made you decide I need to leave?
There were a lot of things leading up to it. You might be the first person that actually asked that, Delia. I love that you asked that. Overall, of course, there was this concept of I wanted to own my life. I wanted to challenge all of that. I wanted to see who I was. But there were moments along the way. Um, I'll give one example that I think was a part of it. By that point in my career, I was, it's a very mentally, physically, and emotionally grueling career. A soloist, being a soloist, you're on the road, as I said, for 6 to 8 weeks at a time. You're living out of a suitcase. You always mentally have to be turned on. You cannot turn off. You always have to be able to operate at peak performance, right? So you could have just gotten on a plane and got off and like had 3 hours of sleep, but you have to go directly to the concert hall and be able to rehearse at the highest level. And the audience doesn't give a crap that you just flew from Rome to Toronto and you're so dead exhausted and you're on the tail end of a 5-week tour. They want to hear something extraordinary, right? And they want to experience their artistic performance. It is extremely grueling life. And I was at a point where I was like, I didn't understand the meaning of what I was doing. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I showing up and playing? Like, I couldn't find the joy and the passion that I used to be able to find just in playing music. So that was already that was frightening to me because I didn't want to hate the thing that I loved. I didn't want to end up resenting what I loved, right? The art that I loved. So that was one thing. And so because of that, I was starting to do certain things. I was a cultural ambassador for the US Department of State, and I was artistic ambassador for UNICEF Spain, and I was going to developing nations to work with children there and doing humanitarian work through my music and my art because I was trying to find meaning. I was desperately trying to find meaning in what it was that I was doing, that it had some greater purpose. So I was already doing those things. So the meaning was already starting to get lost, which for me, as I mentioned earlier, everything needs to be in alignment with my values. And I'm a very purpose and impact-driven person. And so when the meaning starts getting lost, then that's already a big existential internal thing that's happening. And then something happened that still painful for me to talk about. I had 2 beautiful dogs who were the loves of my life. They were with me from New York, my New York years. They moved with me to Holland, and then they moved with me to Spain. They were so brave, both of them. The first one, Millie, passed away during my years in Spain when I was in Madrid. I was married at the time, so whenever I was on tour, my husband would take care of them. But they were my soulmates. So brave. Everything, every chapter in my life, they took it on with me, right? Every step. The second dog, Angel, was 13 years old by this point. I had gotten her my first year living in New York City. As soon as I moved out of the dorms and got my own place, was when I adopted her as a puppy. And she had been with me through all these huge changes, big shifts in my career, all getting married, all these life changes. And I was going to go on tour. And she was old, she was pretty much blind at that point and very kind of thin. And I hugged her. I remember before I left the apartment to go to the airport to go on tour, I hugged her and I just had this feeling. And I hugged her and I said, okay, take care of yourself. I was telling her all these things like, be good, take care of yourself. And then I told my husband, just keep an eye on her, because I was going to be gone for 6 weeks. Right? And I just had this feeling. And then I went on tour. And about 2 weeks into the tour, my husband called me and said that there was an emergency situation with her and that he took her to the vet and they said her kidneys were starting to fail. And if for anyone who has had a pet, you know that it happens very fast. Like all of a sudden they're fine and then all of a sudden they're not. And then 2 or 3 days later, they're gone, right? For the first time, I have never in my life ever canceled a concert. I have never, even with 104-degree fever, sick as a dog, I have never canceled a concert. I canceled the rest of my tour when I got that message. And I did everything humanly possible. At the last minute, I was in Japan at the time, and I was trying to get back to Madrid, and I was trying to get these last-minute flights to get me there as quickly as possible. It was a nightmare. I had like 3 different layovers. It was crazy. And then I finally landed in Miami, and it was the last stop before I could fly from Miami to Madrid. And I was in the Miami airport, and my husband called me. And he said she didn't make it through the night. Just before I got home, she couldn't, if I could have gotten home 8 hours earlier, 10 hours earlier. And I just dropped to the floor in the Miami airport. Security had to come and get me, actually, because I was just inconsolable. Absolutely lost it. I fucking lost it. She had been there for me all these years, and she was alone at the end. For what? For some stupid fucking concert? Because I was on fucking tour. Who fucking cares, And when that happened, I was like, I can't do this. I can't. What if that was someone I loved? My husband, my best friend, someone, and I couldn't be there because of what, this stupid career? Like, that doesn't even, I don't even understand why I'm doing it anymore. What is this shit? And that was really when I knew this is not sustainable. This is no longer aligned with what matters to me and who I am. And I refuse to just be this puppet that's just like doing this. And to this day, that is one of the greatest sorrows of my life, that she died alone. And I wasn't beside her.
Because I guess, that kind of void you talked about growing up of like feeling so isolated and lonely, and is that kind of what she meant to you? That
Yeah, probably, because she was first kind of connection that was my own, right? That it was just between her and me, in New York, brand new place, away from all of that and hometown stuff, right? And she was there for every chapter, accepted me for who I am. She doesn't know, of course, that I'm a pianist, but she accepted me for who I am. She was so brave. And I just could not bear. I think because I understand loneliness and I understand what it feels like when people are not there for you or don't have your back. I could not stand, I could not bear the fact that she was alone at the end.
Mm.
It was just, for me, even to this day, it's very hard for me to accept that she was alone because of everything she did for me, what she meant to me. And
Mm.
I wish I had been there. I should have been there.
I feel like you have to forgive yourself for that.
Probably I still do, but I know. But I just, really, it was that question of what am I doing? What am I doing? What matters in life? What matters to me, right? And that was really kind of a huge moment that pushed me forward towards the final decision.
What kind of dog was she?
Yorkshire Terrier. She was a little Yorkie.
Cute. And so then was that kind of a period of, I mean, were you really sad during that
Yes.
time?
Devastated. Absolutely devastated. It was the first time, probably, in my life where I grieved something, where I really experienced grief because I loved her unconditionally, of course. I think that was the first time when I think about it. Yeah, that kind of loss, that devastation.
And knowing that you were saying goodbye to your career, your identity, like everything.
I know that kind of, I didn't grieve it. Isn't that interesting? That's so interesting that you brought it up that way. The grief I had over losing her was so profound. The grief I had when I left music was not there, actually. Was it scary? Yes. But I was more excited about what was to come, to discover what
Cool.
was to come. So I think there are a lot of things with regards to and it's interesting when you tie it into what happened with Angel, with my dog. I am someone who doesn't necessarily believe in regrets. I think we know what we know at a given moment in time, like I said, and regretting something is like, it's like getting mad at yourself for not knowing something when you were 8 years old. Of course you didn't know, you were 8 years old, so you did what you did at that moment in time, right? So the only time where I feel a faint shadow of that regret is with my dog, with that moment that I wasn't there for her. But again, I can look at it and say, that was the life you were in. That's what happened, and etc. So I think with music, I have no regrets. I did what I did, and I could walk away from it without feeling like, oh, I missed this or I missed that. Like, no, I know what I did, and I feel good about what I did, and it was like that chapter had come to a close, on many different levels.
How did you end up living in Netherlands and Spain, by the way?
Oh, that was because I got engaged. So my ex-husband, so he was my husband at the time, but now he's an ex-husband. My ex-husband and I met in New York, but he was living in Holland at the time. Uh, Also an artist. He was a classical music composer. And so once we got engaged, my career in Europe also at the same time happened to be growing very, very rapidly. And so I thought, you know what, this is a good opportunity for me to be based there for a period of time and to kind of work on that. So I moved to Holland to be with him. We ended up moving to Spain for a number of reasons. He is Spanish, so he's originally from Spain. And I had I had earlier, a couple months prior to that, I had been invited by the U.S. Embassy in Spain to tour the country, to give some master classes and things like that. And I just fell in love with Madrid in the springtime. By the way, Madrid in the spring is so incredibly gorgeous. Madly fell in love. And so when I came back from that tour, I spoke with my husband. And I said, hey, how do you feel about us moving to Madrid? Because I really want to live there. And he's like, yeah, sure. So we ended up moving there.
Cool. Oh my God, you've lived in so many different places. Like, because even Hawaii to New York is so different.
Yes, it is. It is. And I've had the opportunity to travel to so many places, right, because of the touring and the work that I've done. Um, Very fortunate. I love Europe, Spain in particular, because I lived there for so long. It feels like uh, people ask me, "Where's your home?" I said, "I have multiple homes. I love Japan because, of course, my relatives and everybody, my cousins and everyone is there. I speak Japanese. That's my country where I was born. I feel like Hawaii is my home. I have friends there now. It's where I grew up. New York is my home. I adore this city. I came back. I moved back here after leaving. And I love Spain. I love Europe because I lived there for so long, and it feels like another kind of home to me. So I try to go to these four different homes whenever I can to visit because they're a part of my soul.
Where in New York are you based?
I'm in Manhattan. I'm on the Upper West Side. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, I feel like we've only covered like the first bit of your life, but oh my God, I could keep talking to you for ages, but I know you have to go. So I have 3 questions that I ask everyone at the end that are quick. But is there anything else you want to add before I ask you?
We can have another conversation again. How's that? We can continue the next chapter at a later date. We can do that.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Is there a book that has had a big influence on your life?
Two books. No, let me amend that. Can I say 3 books? Is that all right? I name 3. Okay. These are my top 3 novels. Anytime anyone asks me. Beloved by Toni Morrison. I read it when I was 17. Completely transformed my understanding of the power of language. Her monumental command of language is simply remarkable. So Beloved is the first one. Second, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Also, I read when I was 17. Blew my mind, especially the last 5 pages. What was so extraordinary to me about that novel was just the structural command, this incredible representation of how a novel structure can be built and constructed with such mastery so that that ending had the power that it had. I thought it was remarkable. And the third one is Immortality by Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera happens to be one of my favorite authors. It's a shame he never won the Nobel Prize while he was alive, but he has, I think, one of the most interesting, fascinating, brilliant minds that he explores not only in his fiction works, but in his essays as well, about the nature of art, about the nature of humanity, about individuality, about all of those things. So that would be my top 3. I also will never forget the first time I read Milan Kundera. It was that book, Immortality, and it just blew my mind.
Cool. How do you stay grounded?
Like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
I'm pretty, I wouldn't say I'm rigid, but I do have like certain structures that I have in my day that I need in place in order for me to feel like grounded and safe. And those are usually related to like self-care kind of things. So like I do have a certain kind of morning routine. I like to work out in the mornings. I meditate every morning. I go for what I call my morning coffee walk, which you lived in New York, so you know, you just grab your coffee for the bodega and then you go for a little like quick walk just to get the blood going and everything. So I do that daily, and it's amazing the kind of ideas and things that happen when I move my body that way. So certain things like that, I think, keep me centered within myself, which I think is important, and connected with my body.
What kind of meditation do you do?
So I usually just do sometimes if I have time, 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. The other day with the eclipse, I consciously made a choice to not go outside to see it, but instead I meditated for an hour and had an extraordinarily powerful session. I literally just close my eyes and focus on my breathing. And I think maybe because I did music for so long, there's something about that meditative state that feels really like I feel very connected to that. Like I like that feeling. And so, yeah, but usually on the daily, it's just a 5 to 10 minute sort of breathing exercise.
And what 3 words describe the best version of Grace Nikae?
The best version? The best version of me? Oh, that's a good question. The best version of me would be, oh, loving, brave, trusting. Those would be the
Love
words.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Grace. Where can people find
Thank you.
you?
You can find me on X at Kizuna NYC. You can also find me on my website at kizunanyc.com.
Cool. Only if you want to be
Awesome.
found, of course. I have to dig up
Yes.
I have to manifest a situation where you're performing for a charity and I'm there.
You know, you never know. I have a feeling intuitively too that something maybe, I don't know, I just have this feeling that something may be coming up soon too. It's interesting. We'll see.
Cool. I'm excited.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me, Delia. I appreciate this. It was a lovely conversation.